short presentation that I brought in today, which is a collection of Civil War relics which I've collected over the last 20 years. A number of years ago, during the centennial celebration of Civil War, I became very interested in Civil War. And one of the local historians, Eddie Miller, was writing a series of articles on Civil War, which also gave us some information. One of the articles that he did was on, he made reference to the Battle of North Big River Bridge, which is just south of DeSoto. A friend of mine by the name of Ronnie Craig, who died a few years ago, called me up and asked me if I wanted to go with him out to look for some Civil War relics. We'd both grown up together and both interested in that. So we went out and spent the day around the trade trestle. And I think we found a grand total of maybe 4 bullets or something like this. And from that time on, I was hooked on looking for Civil War relics, and I've been at it ever since. We did a lot of research on the Battle of North Big River Bridge, and we found out that in 1861, General M. Jeff Thompson, the Confederate general, was commissioned to come up through Missouri and cut the communications between Pilot Knob, Missouri and St. Louis. He brought with him about 200 soldiers and a group of Indians, and their objective was to burn all the bridges between Pilot Knob and St. Louis. So he came to North Big River Bridge, and there he found a company of Union soldiers. It was an Illinois regiment, and he attacked them, killed, I think, 4, 5, 6, 7 of their soldiers, and the rest of them surrendered. As was the custom in those days, he paroled the soldiers, but he stripped them of all their gear, guns, swords, and whatever, and retreated southward along railroad tracks till he came to Blackwell Station. While at Blackwell Station, he began to divvy up all the loot that he had gotten, including a large supply of overcoats. While he was doing this, another group of Union soldiers had come up the railroad tracks and attacked him. So he sent out his skirmishers, and very quickly they dispatched this company of soldiers, gathered up what loot they could carry, and headed on south again. We began our search at North Big River Bridge with a little bit of information and did a lot of research and found where the camp was. And over the next several years, we located a number of relics that was lost by the soldiers who had camped at the bridge. In fact, most of the stuff that you see in this case right here are relics which came from North Big River Bridge, including the buttons, the eagle plate, percussion caps from the battle, carved letters. The soldiers were very great at carving lead. Some coins and other paraphernalia that they lost, parts of knapsacks, horse gear, canteen stoppers, and so on like that. We hunted Big River Bridge for about 4 years, and as we began to research that area, we made some kind of, to us, startling revelations. One is that Missouri had the 3rd most battles in the Civil War, with over 1,500 skirmishes and battles. And each one of these battles was made up of regiments, companies, and they were scattered all over the place. So as we began to do our research and try to locate these places, we found there were literally thousands of them, most of them unknown to local citizens. From the records, we were able to determine the location of many of these, and they were very easy to find. Others that we went looking for, we were never able to find. Either the records were slightly off, or the soldiers didn't exactly know where they were at. From there, we began to explore down around Pilot Knob, Missouri. We began to hunt there in about 1975, 76, somewhere along in there. And since that was the big battle in southeast Missouri, at least thought so at the time. It seemed a logical place to start. Well, in those days, you could hunt around the fort, in the fort, or any place else you wanted to in the valley. And we proceeded to use our metal detectors, and we located thousands of relics down there. We expanded onto the mountainsides and studied the battle plans of the Confederate soldiers, picked out the most logical places, and began to hunt the mountainsides, where we discovered cannonballs, bullets by the bucketful, and everything else you could imagine. From then on, we began to go into the valleys and hunt for campsites. And we worked our way from one farmer's field to the next. And by the process of elimination, we were able to locate a number of federal infantry camps and cavalry camps. The cavalry camp that we're in right now at Pilot Mound is more than 5 miles away from the fort. So they were scattered in a lot of different directions. We discovered this camp about 2.5 years ago. And since that time, we've gathered probably in the neighborhood of 3,000 bullets, buttons, belt buckles, spurs, coins, no coins. There was one gold ring that had a federal crest that came out of it. Numerous items, all the horse's equipment, knapsack books, and so on like this. One of the things that I try to do when we find these camps is to preserve the relics. The biggest problem that we have today is that a lot of these relics, these campsites, are in fields, and the farmer, through the process of fertilization and the cattle that goes through these fields, the acid in the soil that's produced eats away at many of these relics. So that when we find a lot of these things, they're in very poor shape. So we want to get these relics out of the ground as quick as possible in order to preserve them and protect them. What you see here today is a few of the relics which I've accumulated, and what I have here is a few pistols. Two of the pistols came out of a fire pit in St. Louis. One came from the Sabine River in Texas, and we have numerous belt buckles and other odds and ends which we come out of the camp. These are some of my better items here. They include martingales, belt buckles, and so on like that. In the other case here, I have a collection of hat insignias, and then there's just a lot of odds and ends. When we first went into these camps, you know, being quite young at the time and inexperienced, I had visions of going out there and finding swords and guns and all this sort of stuff laying on top of the ground. And believe it or not, we have located these things, and they have been on top of the ground on occasion. But most of the stuff has been buried for well over 100 years. What I want to do now is I'll just pass some of this stuff around, and if you have any questions, maybe I can try to answer some of your questions. First thing I'll pass around is just these bullets. During the Civil War, there were over 500 different varieties of Union and Confederate bullets. In the last 20 years, I've probably found in the neighborhood of 100 different varieties myself, from the common mini ball, which is a 58 caliber bullet. 69 caliber musket balls are very common, and then you get kind of the exotic bullets, such as this cleaner bullet here. They fired one of these every 10 rounds to clean out the rifle into the barrel. When we find relics like this, we can interpret a great deal by the relic itself. For instance, on this cleaner bullet, I see two things that tell me about this bullet. One is the ring around the top. Civil War musket ramrod had a hollow cap which fit right on that. And from the ring that we find on this thing, I can tell that this gun probably had been fired a number of times because he used a lot of force to ram this bullet down into it. And at the same time, it has a little hole in the top. This tells me that for some reason, probably his gun was all fouled up, that the bullet didn't fire. Powder in the gun didn't go off, so it didn't blow the bullet out. So he used another device on the end of his ramrod, and he screwed it into the top of the bullet here so he could pull it out. So this type of bullet we call a pulled bullet. Calibers range from 31 caliber to somewhere in the neighborhood of 79 caliber. And that's an awful big bullet. This type here is about a 70 caliber bullet. These were made out of soft lead, and when they hit something, they had a tendency to flatten out. So they left some very terrible wounds during the Civil War. Also, I have passed around this little button. This is a common uniform button, general infantry. We find quite a few of these in Civil War camps. In some areas, these things come out of the ground so bad, so corroded, and so eat up, that there's not really much that you can do with it. In other areas where we go, such as in the woods, we find that they come out of the ground in very excellent condition, and sometimes still have the gold on them. Now, the Civil War soldier carried a cartridge box with a strap across his shoulder, these ammunition cases here. He wore 3 plates. One was a U.S. belt plate, which went here. Then he had a U.S. cartridge box plate, which went here, and the eagle plate, which went up here. This was your decorative pieces. Most soldiers, as they went into battle, would take this thing and throw it away. So this made a perfect bullseye for your horn. And it was nice and shiny too, so they would throw this away. This particular one came from the Battle of Shiloh, and the eagle plate here came from the Wilderness battlefield. In the cavalry camp that we're hunting right now, the cavalry wore a different type of belt plate. This one also went on a strap across his shoulder, and he had a hook for the rifle. This belt plate would hold that belt together just like this. And we find these in cavalry camps. Most people who would find something like that would say, well, it's no belt buckle, and probably just throw it away or something like this. But it is a Civil War relic, and it has a lot of value to it. At the beginning of the war, most of the regiments wore epaulets on their shoulders like this. As the recruits came into camp after the first battle, most of the veterans had very little to say to them except to get rid of these dumb things. And so in a lot of the camps, we find these things. And as you can see, it has a piece of steel on the back which rusted up, and the corrosion of this has turned it green. Now, somebody asked me earlier this evening, why don't I clean it up? Mainly because most of these things have developed over the last 100 years patina, which leaves it fairly smooth. If I was to take and try to clean this, it would destroy that patina and literally make the relic look worse than it does right now. Most of the collectors who deal in dug relics like I do would rather have this thing looking like this. I've seen more people who bring me things down at my store, or kids at school who bring me things to show, and their parents have found these things and they spend a lot of time, shining them up. And when they do this, they absolutely ruin the relic. It loses all monetary value whatsoever. In the cavalry camp that we're hunting right now, we found probably 25, 30 spurs. I always had a fascination for these spurs because there's a lot of different varieties. This one here is called a Richmond spur, and it's big, heavy piece of brass, and it has a particular style because of this heavy weight. An officer's spur is a lot thinner and usually has decorative designs around it like this. There's 3 or 4 different types of officer spurs. One that has a US here. There is one Confederate spur that has CS on the back of it also. But most of the spurs that we find are relatively plain, like this one right here. Now, when we first began to hunt pilot Knob, Missouri, one of the things that we looked for the most was artillery shells. We knew that this was an artillery battle. The Union forces in the fort had 32-pounders, they had 24-pounders, and they had 12-pound guns. And as the Confederates crested the top of these mountains down there, they blasted away at them for several hours. And as a result, the whole hillsides down around Pilot Knob, the mountainside, were literally covered with cannonballs and fragments. We discovered a lot of cannonballs which were this size here. Now these are called grape shot or canister, and they fired 9 of these at one time. Now the canister was like a big shotgun going off. They had a smaller iron ball which I didn't bring, and they fired 20, what is it, Jason? 49 of those things at one time? I'm not sure. And it was a big long thing, and it had a lot of these little iron balls in it. So it was like a big shotgun going off. Well, some of the areas that we hunted down there, we found this small canister shot every other foot or so in an area about the size of this room. And so anybody that was standing there, one blast of that cannon would have wiped all of us out right here. This is a 6-pound grape shot, and this is probably a 32-pound grape shot. The standard weapon in the Civil War was the 12-pound Napoleon cannon. It shot a ball this big around. Solid shot weighed 12 pounds. This is an exploding shell. You see the hole where it took a wooden plug. When the cannon went off, the fire would light this fuse, and so many seconds later, the ball would explode, breaking up into a lot of fragments. Also, many of these balls were loaded with 69 caliber bullets, about 50 of them. So if the explosion didn't get you and the fragment didn't get you, maybe one of the little bullets inside would. Now that type of shell there is an exploding shell that took a wooden fuse. This shell here went to a howitzer. This is called a Hotchkiss shell, and it was a solid shot. It was used mainly for knocking down trees to impede the process of the charging troops. This particular size is kind of a rare size. I've only seen about 5 of them in the last 20 years. So this is a rare shell. I was able to get this one through a friend of mine that lives down near Springfield, Missouri. I think it's from the Battle of Wilson's Creek. Now this size shell here, now this is the same, what that one would look like. That was a 3-piece shell. On this one you see the fire groups here. You see a lead band, and you stuff this down the cannon like this. When the cannon went off, it hit this cup, which expanded the lead, and this would give it, take the riflings of the cannon, give it a spin. So it's very accurate at very long distances. The type of fuse system on this type of shell varies from paper cartridges to percussion cap cartridges. A percussion cap fuse is a very dangerous fuse. I've had some in the past. I don't like them. I usually try to sell them off as fast as possible because they are dangerous unless you drill through the shell and take the powder out. Because you never know with this type. I picked them up and I could hear them moving back and forth, the fuse in there. So you never know if that percussion cap actually went off, or maybe one day you're messing around and you drop it. And it might go off. So one of the things that you don't want to do is do that. Okay. With this particular shell, though, I have unloaded it a number of years ago, so I don't worry about it. You can take the fuse out. A little brass fuse looks like this. This particular type of fuse also took a paper cartridge. That's even safer. When we dig these shells up, the paper, of course, absorbs the moisture, and the powder has been diffused probably 100 years ago, and they're totally safe. Steel. What you see here is different types of belt plates that were used by the Union soldiers. The SNY, state of New York supplied its own troops during the war. And so most New York regiments did not have the common U.S. belt plate. They had the SNY. It's a little bit rare, but it's still a very common find for people out in Virginia and Tennessee. You would probably not find any SNYs around here because there were no troops that I know of from New York in the state of Missouri. The top row here of parts are martingales. The martingale was a device that was attached to the horse. You know, the leather strap that went around his neck and comes to a point on his chest. So they would decorate this piece with a heart-shaped design. Sometimes they have numbers in them. Sometimes they have the eagles, like this one here. And some of them are just simply plain, like these. These are all very good finds. We had never found any of these until we had gotten into the camp down at Pilot Mountain that we're in right now. This is some more belt plates. This is a Confederate two-piece. Unfortunately, I only found half of it. The other half, I figure, it's got to be within 3 feet of it, right? Well, I've circled around that 3 foot and expanded outward to 100 feet. I still haven't found the other half of it. I know it's there somewhere. It's just I can't find it. This eagle plate here is very interesting in that I found the bigger half of it on one trip, and 2.5 years later, about 50 feet away, I dug the other half of it. So I was real happy that it meant I got it. I knew exactly where it should go, and I brought it back and put it there. The others are rosettes off a horse's bridle, and U.S. belt plates from different battlefields. Stone River, Tennessee, the Wilderness of Virginia. This one I got from Pilot Mountain, Missouri also. The different branches of the service were represented by different types of hat pins. The bugle represented the infantry. The eagle here was part of the cavalry or Jefferson Davis pin, and it was used by officers, sometimes in infantry, sometimes in the cavalry. The cross cannons here were artillery. This big eagle here is a pre-Civil War eagle, and probably would date from the 1820s. Now, at the beginning of the Civil War, the government had warehouse after warehouse of old items, and they would issue these to the troops. And so in some of the early camps, we find stuff going back to the War of 1812. This device here, which is a little crest device, is a 3-piece unit. I found 2 pieces on one occasion. 9 months later, and 500 feet across the field, I dug the other half of it and was able to put it back together also. You can see the difference in the 2 soil conditions just 500 feet apart. This first half, which is kind of really pitted up. We dug this in an area where the farmer had fertilized the field. The other one we found near a group of woods which had not been fertilized. You can see the difference in the two items. We find a lot of odds and ends. For instance, a little cross here. These wrenches here are for rifles. A little toy. I think this they put a string through that, and you've done that with a button or something like that. They had little toys like that. And then we occasionally find a coin. The one thing that has really disturbed us about hunting Pilot Knob all these years is the fact that we have not come up with any coins from the Civil War in any of the camps that we've hunted down there. And we've hunted probably 6 or 7 camps. These guys had to be the poorest soldiers that ever existed. Here we have a little patriotic pin that's from North Big River Bridge. This pin I picked up on one occasion. I thought it was a piece of tin and a piece of junk, and I laid it on a rock. And the next time I went to this spot, I just simply accidentally went over it again. And when I picked it up, the rain had washed it off, and I could see the outlines of stars. And so I put the two pieces back together, and I get a little patriotic pin here. These two pins right here are also from North Big River Bridge. The Illinois company that was stationed at the bridge apparently was Company C. And they also had this Jefferson Davis pin, which was broken up, and I was never able to get all the parts back together again. Okay, if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to. Yes, ma'am.
When I was doing some research down in that corner south of the river at Vineland on the west side, I picked up a rumor that in one of the farm ponds down there, there was supposed to have been dumped cannons and things like that. I was wondering, have you ever found those in a farm pond?
Cannon?
It looked like they just dumped it in a pond to get rid of it so the other side couldn't have it.
This was very common.
And there's supposed to be one down in that corner in there someplace.
I've never heard that before.
Some old man when I was down doing some other type of research told me about it. But he wouldn't tell me
I'll
where
get
it was.
with you after this. This sounds very interesting. The only cannon I've ever heard of being found was from Pilot Knob. And this was back in, well, after the battle, they put, or during the battle, they put 2 cannons up on the hill, and every gun in the fort just whipped around and shot at those cannons. They disabled one, and the rest of them retreated. This cannon laid up on Shepherd's Mountain from the time of the battle till about 1912. Some farmer drug it off. And in 1960, a doctor in St. Louis heard about it. He went down there and he spent a week looking for it. He finally found the cannon. It was in a guy's chicken coop. And so he purchased it for little nothing, and he restored it on a carriage and so on like this. And this is the gun, if you go down Pilot Knob today and go to the museum, this is the gun that was actually used in the battle. Now that they opened the museum down
Where
there.
is the museum?
At Fort Davison.
At Fort Davis.
Yeah, they just built this building in the last 2 years, I guess.
Since the last...
Since the last reenactment down there. And it's about time they did. I'm real happy to see them do that. Of course, they got a lot of their facts wrong about the battle. I think they do because...
no, I'm not disagreeing with you.
I've read a book real recently called Thunder in the Valley, which was written about the battle. And he places cannon positions in certain areas where we've hunted out from directly out away where these cannons should be at, and we did not find the type of fragments and shells that should have been shot from those particular guns.
You want to talk to Gary Bull at the regional office of the Reserve Parks. He's in charge of that mess down there.
Okay. So there is some discrepancy from what we found. Now, of course, there could be a number of reasons for this. One, they may have had guns at different positions at different times and practice. They did practice because when the actual battle occurred, they knew the exact range of every gully on the side of the mountains. That's why the Confederates lost so many men coming down the mountainsides. So that may be one reason, but in one area he had 24-pound guns, and all we found was 32-pound fragments. So unless they did something that I'm not aware of, they should have been a 32-pound gun in that particular moment. We find in this area more from the northern forces. Pilot Knob was occupied at the beginning of the war with 10,000 Union soldiers. And so these camps are all Union camps that we're hunting. There was sort of an informal line drawn from Cape Girardeau through Pilot Knob and up to Jefferson City. And most of the Confederate forces were south of that line. So they fortified areas down at New Madrid, Sykeston, Island Number 10, and farther south, Greenville.
What was it, Blackwell?
There was a skirmish at Blackwell after Thompson retreated. Another company of troops, and we've never really figured out whether these, from the things we've read, whether these troops came north from a camp or south from a camp. But anyway, they showed up and they opened fire on the Confederates. The Confederates deployed and very easily repulsed them and then took off with the tall timber.
I just wanted to ask you, are you allowed to keep everything you dig out?
Is it protected way or controls on it?
Does it depend on if it's private property or park?
We have been very fortunate. All the farmers who owned the land where the battle actually occurred usually are more interested in farming than they are in this. And they have given us, we've been very fortunate, to let us run from one end of their farm to the other and dig thousands of holes on their property because we try to leave everything the way that we found it, in the way of holes. There's only been, in the last 20 years, I think maybe 4 people who've ever turned me down when I asked them to hunt on their property. And of those, there's usually people who have had some problem with relic hunters in the past, or in a lot of cases, it's not the relic hunters, it's the hunters. They get on their property and cause a lot of problems, and then they just get really touchy about anybody getting on their property. But one camp down Pilot Knob is, this lady owns 400 acres of ground. There's 2 infantry camps and a cavalry camp on that property. And we've been hunting that. We used to go down there every week. And we just parked in one spot, and when she went by, we waved at her, and so on like that. Of course, we do certain little things to try to be extremely nice and grateful to the lady. For instance, after I dug up a number of bullets and stuff, I made her a plaque, gave her things like this on occasion. And this, helps us out too. But as for the relics we find, most of the farmers, they could care less. And I don't think that a lot of them realize the value of some of the things that we are coming up with. For instance, Sunday, my partner and myself went down to Pilot Knob and hunted this farm, this cavalry camp. We are digging a very rare little bullet down there that's worth between $20 and $30 a piece. Okay? He dug 10 of them out of one hole, so he made a $200 a day. I don't think the farmer would have let us in there if they realized that the value of the stuff we come out of there. Like I said, an average mini ball is worth $1. We've dug 3,000 off this guy's property, plus the belt buckles and everything. So there is a great deal of monetary value to some of this stuff, especially the rare items. If you can get to a Confederate camp, I know people make $1,000 a day in a Confederate camp.
How about Victoria and Fort Hill? Have you done much?
Victoria,
Along the river. They tell me after a flood you can find all sorts of things along that river.
Down in Victoria, there is a camp, there's a couple of camps that I've heard about. I live about a half a mile from Victoria.
That Rollo place was where they were stationed.
Yeah. And I've never hunted down there. It's easier for me to get in my car and drive 100 miles to spend a day hunting than it is to hunt something a half a mile down the road.
How about Fort Hill?
Fort Hill is, I've heard tales about Fort Hill ever since I was in high school. Something's going on there that I've never been able to pinpoint.
Some people say it was a prison.
I've heard all kinds of things about whether there's graves up on top of Fort Hill.
Where is that?
It's,
Up
Fort
by
Hill
the
makes a
covered
big
bridge.
horseshoe shape. And it's out on one of the ends of those horseshoes. And there's, most of them, I think there's one or two tombstones, the rest are just stone markers.
There's a
And
bunch
below
of
that, there are
prehistoric
trenches.
carvings up there too.
Now, when I was in high school, we did do some digging up underneath the overhangs for Indian relatives. But I've heard rumors about what Fort Hill is ever since I was in high school, and I still haven't found anybody who's actually ever found anything up there.
Where is
It's about 3 miles north of Hillsborough on 21. You know where Sandy Creek Bridge is? All right, Sandy Creek Bridge goes straight up the hill. That's one end of the horseshoe. That'd be the upper end, and then swing back down the road. My great-grandfather guarded Buck's Bridge, just on the other side of Victoria. Now, I've hunted for that camp on several occasions. I've never been able to find that camp at all. I know it's around, it has to be around there fairly close. But for some reason, it
How
just
about
keeps
by the
losing.
cemetery?
What?
How about over by the cemetery?
Which
The
cemetery?
Victoria Cemetery.
One up on the hill? That would be too far away from the bridge, I think.
Some Civil War soldiers buried there.
Well, did they die during the war or after
Yeah.
the war? They died during the war?
There's a drummer boy, I believe, or a bugle boy.
Now, down, a couple hundred feet below my house, there's a grave on Steve Weidman's property. And I understand that this was a Union officer. He was shot off his horse while going to Victoria, and he was buried where he fell. But I have not been able to confirm that. That's the rumor that I've heard.
There's a Civil War grave over near Highway 67 and 110 in the hedgerows over there.
There is.
Did they have a title called Musket Man?
Rifleman.
No, they started at Musket.
I've not heard that term. Have you ever heard that term? They had riflemen. They had pioneers.
This is a federal,
No, I'm not familiar with that particular type. Where was it made? A lot of it, I imagine, was up on Arsenal Street. They mined a lot of lead down Pilot Knob. They had smelters at Belgrade and at Mineral Point. And so a lot of activities at Mineral Point, I understand there was something like 4,000 Union soldiers stationed there for a while. And that's another place I know they were there. I've read that they were there, but I've never been able to locate the exact location of the camps.
Ridgewood, Ricewood, Ridgewood, hang out there.
There are camps out there, but these are also very difficult. When you read the original records, the ORs, they always say to such and such camp, such and such. But they don't know, you don't really know whether that camp is a mile in the middle of town, a mile outside of town, in which direction. Occasionally you run across little references to camps that are very easy to pinpoint. I remember reading one order where the guy said I was down at Irondale, and the troops apparently were in the town, and this was an order, please take your troops 1 mile north of town to where the blockhouse was. And dispersed them around the blockhouse to protect the railroad crossing. So I went down there and I started in Milltown. I walked a mile up the track, and I'm standing there in the middle of nowhere. I said, well, there's no way in the world there can be a blockhouse at this location. And if there was, it would be the poorest location you could possibly find. But it's probably within a quarter of a mile from where I was standing, but in which direction. You have to get in there and you have to do a lot of looking. Sometimes you'll spend 5 or 6 trips looking for a spot before you actually find it. And then you always run the risk that some other relic hunter has been there 20 years ago and cleaned it all out.
What was the very first battle on the very first one? The reason I asked, we were at Carthage this spring, and they told us there that the very first battle in the Civil War was fought at Carthage, Missouri.
Well, I always considered it to be Fort Sumter, the beginning of the war. But even before that, there was a bridge out in Virginia where there was some skirmishing going on. I couldn't begin to tell you the name of the bridge, but it's out there in black. It's a covered bridge. But if you look at Missouri, the Civil War began in 1856 in Missouri with the guerrilla warfare between Kansas and Missouri. The jayhawkers from Kansas raiding over and taking slaves. The Missourians, bushwhackers going over and taking revenge. Like that. So the border warfare in Missouri was occurring many years before the Fort Sumter was actually fired. The first battle in Missouri probably would be Camp Jackson, which was not really a battle. They simply surrounded and took these guys prisoner. General Lyons then moved down to Springfield, fought the Battle of Wilson Creek, which pretty much left Missouri in Union hands. That's probably why we don't have a lot of items that were made in Missouri. For instance, in some Confederate camps you'll find Missouri state seal buttons. Well, this was Missouri State Guard unit. When the Federals moved in, they gave everybody federal uniforms. And so we find the eagle buttons. Anybody else?
In your research, pinpoint like different companies, where they was at, great-great-grandfather, Company B, 12th Regiment, Missouri Cavalry. Somewhere look it up where that particular group of men were.
You can write to, I've got the address somewhere. It's the National Archives or Veterans Administration, one of these organizations. I think it's the Archives. If you know the man's name, the regiment, you can write and get a complete copy of his war record. They still have all these.
National Genealogy Association and the battlefield are getting together on that type of thing.
Are they?
You write to the battlefield where your person was, and they're putting the records in that one, so they can give you a complete printout of the person that was at that battlefield.
Very recently, we were talking about the old church on 3rd Street, which belongs to my uncle. When they had an auction a few weeks ago and sold off all his stuff, he had a lot of my family history, and I was able to obtain this. Among the documents I found was where my great-grandfather had wrote to Jefferson City for a pension back in 1914 or something there, and again in 1921. And they at that time sent him a copy of his enlistment. So I have this copy, and he wasn't in the Army very long, but it tells the company that he was in, the regiment that he was in, where he signed up at, the number of days he was in service. I also found out something very interesting, which I was not aware of. He was writing letters to some senator in Jefferson City, and he had sent a copy of this stuff to the senator. And the senator told him, a letter back, and he wrote, returning his original letter. And in his original letter, he said, I was at this particular company at one time, but later on in the war, I re-enlisted and was in a different company. Do you need the information of both companies for me to get his pension? Well, we know the one company, but I sure don't know what the other company was, because he didn't say what it was.
Doug, how deep do you find a lot of this stuff? I know you must have a pretty good metal detector to locate it, but how deep down are you talking? Just
Believe it or not, the other day, Sunday, I picked up a Civil War button with my toes. I got a reading, do like this, and there it was, and I picked it up. In fact, one of these big buttons I got here was laying on top of the ground also. Usually when you get something like that, you figure it's a shotgun shell and you just move on. But after I picked up that big button on top of the ground, I said, maybe I ought to check this over a little bit closer. And so I have been doing that. And the camp we're at now, I've found maybe 5 or 6 buttons that are still on top of the ground. One of the bullets I found was on top of the ground too. So it's laid there all that time.
how deep have you let it go?
The deepest I will go is probably on an artillery shell. They can embed themselves 3 feet in the ground. We were hunting down at New Madrid last spring, and I dug a shell down there that was 18 inches, which I thought was very shallow, but it was a big gunboat shell about this long, about that big around. And that ground down there is so soft and sandy that I thought it would be 3 foot in the ground. But I've also done 12 pounders like that. The average depth for an artillery shell is somewhere between 18 and 24 inches. We found after the battles on many occasions, the guys would pick up the garbage that was left all over the place, and they'd dig a big hole and drop it in. We were hunting a patch of woods down in Stones River, Tennessee a couple of years ago, and my buddy, he's got to be the luckiest guy in the world. I went over to this fence line, looked over there, and said, there's tin cans and garbage everywhere, as far as the eye can see. And so I don't want to get into that mess. You're going to make yourself crazy with all this tin cans and stuff. So he jumped in there, and I went out to the field to hunt the artillery. He was there 5 minutes tops. He comes over there and he hollers, hey, Doug, come over here, I got something good. And I go, I don't want to go look at this. So I went over to the fence, and he says, I got a rifle. And I said, are you sure it's a rifle? It's just an old barrel. Cover it up, forget it. So we jumped the fence and went over there, and you can see the barrel bands on this rifle. And I said, by golly, you got yourself a rifle. About time, we've been hunting for years. So we started uncovering. He took one in, and I took the other. We started uncovering this thing. Be darned if another barrel didn't pop up. He had 2 rifles out of one hole. They were Austrian muskets. One was a 58 caliber, and one was a 69 caliber. Well, that made a believer out of me. The next time we were down there, I jumped into that patch of woods, and I brought another friend with me, and I told him, I said, well, in this patch of woods, we got the bayonet, we got belt buckles, we got 2 rifles, we got artillery shells, we got probably 200 bullets. There's more stuff in here. So we split up. He came up the fence line like this, and he used his metal detector, and he got a reading, looked down at his tin can, stepped over the tin can, and went on. Well, I was coming this way, and I saw him do it, and so we stopped, talked a couple of seconds, and then he went on this way, and I went on down this way, and I hit that tin can too, and I had enough sense to kick it out of the way, womp, 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 and I dug down and dug a rifle that he had just stepped over. So, on that day, he was about ready to kill me. But we get a lot of things like this where they have dumped a lot of stuff. The last place that we hunted down there, Herb, my friend, he got a reading in this field. This farmer was one of the few people who never let us or anybody else on his property. Well, about 5 years ago, this man had a stroke, and he went to a nursing home, and we said, well, we'll take another shot at it. The farm's for sale, surely they can't object. So we went and knocked on the door, and this guy came to the door, it was a brother-in-law or something. He says, sure, go on out there, we don't care. So we went out into the field out in front of this guy's house, and we knew that we'd probably have maybe 2 hours tops before the lady would come home and run us out. So we started hunting, and this guy had never let anybody hunt his property. The front field was covered with artillery shells. Whatever they had, it was kind of a sinkhole area. They probably had some hidden batteries in there because they had lobbed in from the opposite direction about 6 different types of shells. And we found an area the size of this room, we dug 10 shells out of that area. Well, last time we were down there, we pretty near wiped out this field, and we got a reading on a very small, faint target. He dug down 2 feet or so, and he dug a 6-pound cannonball. Right next to that cannonball, there was a sword, a Confederate sword. So apparently we think that probably they dug a big hole, maybe there was a gully there, they threw the stuff in, and over the years it just simply got covered up. There's probably be a lot more stuff in that field that's just a little bit too deep for us. We're going to have to slow way down very slowly in order to get these deeper objects.
What is the value of a rifle, as you know?
The one I dug up was a Confederate musket. I'd say it had no stock on it. It was really rusted up pieces of iron is what it was. I cleaned it up real good as best I could to preserve it. I mounted it, and I would say the value of it would be in the neighborhood of a couple $100. The unusual thing about the rifle I dug was that it was a model 1842 percussion cap rifle. But the date on the lock plate, which came out very good, was 1819. As far as I know, in 1819 they weren't using percussion, it was all flintlock. But this is not a conversion. It is a standard pattern 1842. So this is something that's kind of boggled my mind in the last couple of years. The value of relics varies from 50 cents up to many thousands of dollars. There was a man in England went to an antique shop and he bought a belt buckle that said Confederate States Navy on it. I think he paid probably $10 for it. He came back, sold it for $5,000. The guy who bought it sold it for $7,000. The next guy sold it for $16,000. So, not bad. I'd never run across anything.
Well, are relics anywhere like on anybody's place? Like around the spring?
Well, I'd like to say that they're not, because the soldiers were, camped in a given spot. Well, the next spot they camped in might be 12 miles down the road. But I can't say that for sure because I have used my metal detector here in town up on Pratt Street and dug Civil War bullets out of a person's yard. Now, whether it was just a souvenir that somebody brought home and lost in the yard
How do you
later.
detect the bullet from a bobcat or a tab?
Well, the metal detectors that we use today are very sophisticated. Many of them it has a meter on it which will tell you penny, nickel, dime, quarter, and you just happen to know where a bullet will come in on that meter. A button will come in another spot, and the belt buckle will come in another spot. So you learn your machine very well, and you get lucky sometimes. Any other questions? Okay, well, I thank you for inviting me here today. And,